Welcome back to Breaking the Chains, healing from emotional and physical abuse. Donations help this podcast to grow and generate more fluently. Also, I am your host, Kelly. This is Season 10, Episode 4. Again, I want this to be a community of survivors and victims of domestic violence who share your horrific experiences about domestic violence as you are going through the healing process or have went through the healing process. So please feel free to like, subscribe, comment in the comment section. So I'm going to begin with a question. Please feel free to comment. Did your abuser, ex-abuser, or narcissist jump into a new relationship immediately after you all's breakup or divorce? So the title of this episode is called, Why Does an Abuser or Narcissist Jump into a New Relationship immediately after your breakup or divorce? So let's discuss it. The abuser or narcissist immediately jumps into a new relationship to secure their validation and control. Also, an abuser or narcissist transitions into a new relationship immediately, for he or she needs a new supply to fill the void instantly in his or her life, and the need for constant admiration. What percentage of abusers do you think move on quickly to a new relationship after a breakup or divorce? It is 93% of abusers move on quickly to a new relationship after a breakup or divorce. A majority of abusers have the new supply on the sidelines before you all's relationship ends. The reason an abuser has the new supply on the sidelines for he or she is lying about being in a relationship or lying about being in a marriage. This is known as the grooming stage for an abuser, because he or she utilizes their new supply for validation and control. Also, the abuser transitions into a new relationship suddenly after you all's breakup or divorce, for he or she has to control the false narrative and maintain their fake image. The abuser jumps quickly into a new relationship after a breakup or divorce because it goes together with the smear campaign and having the new supply to support his or her false narrative. This means an abuser transitions into a new relationship quickly after a breakup or divorce because he or she wants the survivor to look like the reason the breakup happened, instead of it actually proving that ex-abuser's toxic behaviors is the reason the breakup or divorce occurred. The breakup or divorce is 100% the abuser's fault. An abuser transitions into a new relationship quickly after a breakup or divorce, for it feeds his or her ego. The abuser jumps into a new relationship suddenly after a breakup or divorce, for he or she wants to feed into their sense of entitlement. Although victims and survivors of DV have experienced physical and emotional abuse, their abuser transitions into a new relationship suddenly after a breakup or divorce, for he or she wants to avoid taking accountability for their abusive actions and making the abuser's false narrative proclaiming his or her survivor for being the reason the relationship ended. An abuser wants to maintain their ego, their charm, validation. That is why he or she immediately jumps into and begins a new relationship with their new supply. The abuser transitions into a new relationship immediately after a breakup or divorce out of a sense of desperation. An abuser starts a new relationship with his or her new supply suddenly after a breakup or divorce to avoid any responsibility for their abusive actions. So, the new supply steadily builds up the abuser's ego. Therefore, it allows him or her to avoid being the reason the breakup or divorce occurred. Also, the new supply helps an abuser to maintain the false narrative of being the victim. In reality, an abuser's victims or survivors are the real victims of physical and emotional abuse. So then the 9 signs of being a new supply to an abuser are: 1. The abuser and new supply publicly display their performative happiness. This means the abuser and the new supply will put on a performance which is fake about being very happy in their relationship. And then when they get home, the abuser is very toxic toward his or her partner. However, the abuser wants to seem as if they are not an abuser, so they will perform, and the new supply will perform like their relationship is a-okay. Number 2, the new supply only sees their abuser's victim or survivor as the problem. He or she will not admit or see his or her abuser caused tremendous trauma to their victim or survivor. 3. An abuser transitions immediately into a relationship with a new supply because he or she does not want to be alone. 4. An abuser only chooses his or her new supply suddenly after a breakup or divorce, for the new supply will consistently strengthen their abuser's ego. Number 5. The abuser only displays affection with his or her new supply publicly for validation from others. An abuser is not showing true emotion publicly with his or her new supply. 6. An abuser utilizes sex with his or her new supply for also performance, and the abuser wants to avoid emotional intimacy. 7. The new supply will adapt to every need and every want of the abuser. 8. The new supply reinforces the avoidant behavior, meaning the new supply will constantly not hold the abuser accountable for his or her abusive behaviors. Number 9, an abuser will reference about his or her new supply to their survivors. Meaning an abuser will brag about to the survivor about the new supply and his or her relationship consistently with their survivor, trying to make the survivor believe that they are actually in an not an abusive relationship, which they are. They're very happy, which that's totally false. There's still abuse consistently going on in their environment or home on a daily basis. A majority of abusers have a narcissistic personality. It means the abuser believes he or she is superior to their victims and survivors. The narcissistic personality disorder of the abuser consists of entitlement, manipulation, and the abuser's need for excessive admiration from others. An abuser can easily move into a new relationship because his or her abusive actions, their narcissistic personality disorder, projection, the blame shifting tactic, and the manipulation technique. However, the survivors of the abuser will not jump quickly into a new relationship, for he or she is dealing with the hurt and trauma caused by their ex-abuser. Even though the survivor escaped his or her abuser, post-separation abuse will begin immediately after the survivor escaped the abusive relationship. So I go more in depth about post-separation abuse in previous episodes, so please feel free to go back and listen. So I'm going to make this a short statement about post-separation abuse. So post-separation abuse is when the ex-abuser will continually utilize the intimidation tactic on his or her survivor, financial abuse, harassment, and stalking. Also, the survivor will not move on quickly to a new relationship, for he or she is experiencing the narcissistic victim syndrome from their ex-abuser. So the narcissistic victim syndrome is a severe psychological trauma consisting of emotional and physical trauma, and it is caused by his or her ex-abuser's narcissistic personality disorder. Also, narcissistic victim syndrome symptoms are severe anxiety, extreme self-doubt, the trauma, and consisting also of manipulation and the gaslighting tactic and isolation. A majority of survivors of domestic violence experiencing the post-separation abuse, narcissistic victim syndrome, manipulation, gaslighting, and smear campaign tactics suffer in silence. That is the major reason survivors of DV will not move quickly to a new relationship. The emotional and physical abuse that occurred with his or her abuser is still happening consistently. It is just other forms of abuse. Survivors of DV will not move on quickly to a new relationship, for the post-separation abuse, narcissistic victim syndrome, manipulation, gaslighting, and the smear tactics caused long-lasting emotional trauma from their ex-abuser, which created damaging side effects for a long period of time. In conclusion, an abuser immediately jumps into a new relationship after a divorce or breakup with his or her new supply for stirring up their ego, validation, control, charm, and to avoid accountability of his or her abusive actions in their previous relationship. Also, abusers are. Let me go back and start all over. Also, abusers use his or her new supply to utilize the smear campaign and gaslighting techniques against their victims and survivors. Abusers are narcissists. That's why he or she moves on quickly to a new relationship after a breakup or divorce. Therefore, abusers do not care about the psychological and physical trauma he or she caused to their victims and survivors. So abusers immediately jump into a new relationship. Because an abuser is not empathetic. Abusers must protect his or her fake image. So he or she will transition into a new relationship. The new supply or new partner operates with the abuser's bondage, and it helps an abuser's ego to grow larger. Therefore, it is extremely important for survivors to remember it's totally normal for an abuser or ex-abuser to move on quickly to a new relationship after a divorce or breakup. Also, victims and survivors should truly believe that you are not irreplaceable. Abusers have many psychological issues which cause him or her to jump immediately into a new relationship after you all's divorce or breakup. Victims and survivors of domestic violence are very valuable, and you are very worthy of unconditional and genuine love. Abusers are not replacing their victims and survivors. The abuser gets into a new relationship very quickly after you all's breakup or divorce because an abuser needs a new supply to maintain his or her unresolved psychological issues. Thank you again for watching the podcast, and I am very thankful for each listener and each supporter of this podcast. Have an awesome day.